welcome to the Doofcast, a film and TV podcast from Doof Media. I am your host, Scott Daly, and joining me, as always, it's the son of a Russian oligarch, Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
What's up, Drat? How you doing?
Did you marry any prostitutes lately?
Not lately.
Oh, okay, good. I'm glad you remembered the word for brother.
Yeah, see, that was the same movie. That was the same intro joke bit that I did like 5 years ago when we did the film Drat, which was a really good film that we
great
enjoyed.
Movie.
Yeah.
I think that's the only thing it has in common with this movie is that they're good movies. But yeah. This week on the show, our series covering the Best Picture nominees for the 2025 Oscars continues. We're on film number 4 of 9, and we are going to be talking about Anora. I'm pretty excited about this one, Matt. You know, I guess spoilers for our eventual conversation, but sitting down to watch this one, I was like, yeah, this is why we do this whole series.
Yeah.
Stuff like this.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And then after we talk about Anora, we're going to wrap everything up, but with a brief conversation about episode 2 of season 2 of Severance. Like we said last week, that's going to just kind of be our second segment of the show for as long as Severance is going, because we're enjoying it so much. So spoilers for that. If you haven't seen it, I would not listen to that conversation.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, Matt, let's get into it. Let's talk all about Anora.
Hi, I'm Annie. You don't have cash? Let's go to the ATM. Well, we could go chill out in a private room.
I got a kid who wants someone who speaks Russian.
My Russian is terrible. I can't even roll my R's.
No.
Я просто хотел тебе предложить. Ты хочешь быть эксклюзивно со мной?
15. Cash up front.
Deal.
Deal.
What is this movie about?
A young escort from Brooklyn meets and impulsively marries the son of a Russian oligarch. Once the news reaches Russia, her fairy tale is threatened as his parents set out for New York to get the marriage annulled.
This movie was written and directed by Sean Baker. It stars Mikey Madsen, Paul Weissman, and Yuri Borisov. Matt, what did you think of Anora?
So there's all kinds of silly little jokes that I could make about, how every year there's got to be one Best Picture nominee that is basically pornography.
Sure.
Which is what was it called? Something little things. What was it last year?
Huh?
It was really good, but I forget the name of it. No, you don't remember what I'm talking about?
I'm frantically looking. I don't remember any of the nominees last year. So
it was the one with. Damn it! There's one with Willem Dafoe where he was all deformed and mutilated.
Oh, yes. What was that called? I honestly don't remember. I know exactly what you're talking about.
It was like what it's Poor Things. Poor Things.
Yeah. Yes, you were close.
Poor Things last year and now Anora this year. So now that I've gotten my like dismissive, superior smugness out of the way, like it's actually a very enjoyable movie. It is, pornography, but it's self-aware about what it's doing. It's doing interesting things. There's a lot of really great story moments. There's a lot of subtlety. It won me over. I'll put it that way. I think the first bit of the movie, I was like, okay, this is a bit much. And then eventually the characters and the drama of the situation pulled me in, and I was into it. What did you think?
I love this movie. I love this movie so much. And I take issue with your description of it as pornography. I don't think pornography is intended to titillate, and that's it. And that is not what this movie is doing at all. I mean, yes, is there a lot of sex in this movie? Is there a lot of nudity in this movie? Certainly. Is it pornography? No, I don't think so.
Oh, yeah. I don't really care to nitpick definitions. I will say this movie was trying to titillate more than Poor Things was. If we're making a comparison, which the only reason we're making this comparison is because that was the nudity heavy movie from last year. That
Sure.
movie
Yeah.
was like every time there was nudity, it was like punching you in the face, trying to make sure you were not enjoying it. Whereas I think this movie did not do that. This movie was trying to cast a lot of what was happening in a positive light. Actually, in fact, there were whole sequences.
At least at first, yeah.
At least at first, right? And that's I don't know if this is a strange starting point for the movie, but I thought it was interesting. And I don't know if this is a complaint or just an observation. I haven't quite settled down on what I think about this, but the movie changes in tone so much over its runtime.
Yeah.
Toward the beginning, you almost think you're in one of those, like, this is a young person film. This is a romp. We're showing, isn't it fun to stay up all night at the nightclub and do cocaine and have unsafe sex? Isn't this all great? And and the way it's shot is supposed to make it seem really cool. And like the way the soundtrack is like, oh, look how awesome this is for everyone involved. There are no downsides, and you will live forever. And then the movie at a certain point, kind of you crash into the wall, and that stops being the case. And then the movie changes tone like 6 more times. So again, don't know if that's a criticism yet. Maybe we'll figure out what I think in the course of this conversation.
Yeah, I don't think it is. I mean, I think it's something the movie is definitely deliberately doing, because I agree with you. This is a movie in which you have a character that's essentially getting to live out the dream for someone of her occupation, right? Like this is Pretty Woman-esque at the beginning of the movie, right?
Yeah,
she comes in contact with this incredibly rich person. She hits it off with him and is whisked away. What starts with just a week-long agreement, which, by the way, $15,000 for a week of work.
Yeah,
I just really think she should have gone higher than that.
Yeah,
like,
I bet
how
she
much
could
do you
have gone
think she's
higher.
making each night at the club, right? Like,
I don't know.
probably $1,000, I would think, on a good night.
Yeah, hard to say. I don't have a good sense of this.
Well, I'm just saying she should have asked more. By the way, like I looked this up because I was curious. In Pretty Woman, which is a movie that came out in 1990, Julia Roberts got $3,000 for a week of work. That, even in 1990 money, seems pretty low.
Yeah, I mean, that's some steep inflation, man.
Have a little self-respect, Julia.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I think this is definitely a movie that it is doing this thing where you meet this woman, she feels incredibly realized and real. Like the second you meet her, I think Mikey Madison did such a good job with this performance throughout. But she gets kind of whisked away, and you are kind of finding yourself enraptured by the life that she's enraptured by. But I think there's also this thing at the back of your mind that you're like, okay, incredibly rich Russian dude, idiot son, this is going to go really, really bad. And you're kind of, at least I was kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew eventually, especially once it became clear they were about to get married, that this was going to blow up in everyone's faces. And I was expecting a blow up that was violent and cruel, because, there's connotations with Russian oligarchs, right? And what they're going to do to people that don't do what they want. And so that's kind of what I was expecting. And so I was kind of waiting for a tonal shift in this movie. But then the movie shifts tonally in a way I was not expecting at all, because the Russians show up and it's a comedy. Like it's like a very physical kind of slapstick comedy in the first scene with Anora and in the two guys in the house. And that is really interesting, because this is a sequence in which she is being kidnapped and tied up. And she's in her underwear, and you would expect, again, my expectations were a certain level of discomfort at the fact that they're tying this woman up and could do violent things to her, but it keeps playing as a comedy. And so, like, I was just thrown aback about what was going on in this movie. And it makes it, in my opinion, like a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun watching this movie. I think it was just filled with wonderful performances. And I think at the end of it, ends up being incredibly dramatic and emotional, and left me moved by the ending of the movie. So I am so on board for this film. I really, really liked it.
Yeah, I think for me, the ending of the film kind of made the movie. I think that happens sometimes where, you don't know how you feel about the movie until it ends, because you don't really know what the thesis statement of the movie is
Mm-hmm.
until it ends. And it ends in a way that made me feel like, okay, I get it. You and me are on the same page here, movie. I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't sure what we were gonna do here, but I get it. I really liked the ending. I thought I like the just we're doing spoilers, right? Like
Yeah. Oh yeah.
just that last shot where it just goes to credits with her weeping and no music. I was just like, perfect,
Yeah.
like just a perfect note to end this movie on.
Yeah, well, I
Um,
mean, like just the whole everything leading up to that too, right? Like
yeah,
the sex at the very end of the movie
hmm,
is just heartbreaking because
yeah,
you're just like looking at her and you're like, why are you doing this? And the answer, depressingly, is because she doesn't know what else to do. That her life and like love and sex are so transactional in her life that it's like, here's this guy, he was kind of nice to her, um and so it's like, okay, I guess I'll sleep with him. And then the second he tries to kiss her, she completely breaks down
yeah,
because she's so fucking broken
yeah,
by this experience and by her entire life that, like, oh my god, it's just, it breaks your heart. It absolutely breaks your heart.
yeah. I think my interpretation was like consistently, that character. I think Ivan, is it
Igor,
Igor? Yeah, sorry, Igor
remember,
was
because
yeah, yeah.
it
He's a
means
hunchback.
warrior. No,
Yeah,
it doesn't.
Li-
It means hunchback.
like he's clearly um interested in her, but he's like, other than the fact that he is having to tie her up as part of his job, he's being like
Yeah,
respectful and actually thinking about her as a human being, which
the
is
only one that
something,
is, yes,
the,
yeah,
the only one that is, including her husband. Um, and that's why she's so furious with him consistently. Like, she can't stand that there's this guy who's actually treating her as a human and showing her kindness. She treats him like shit. She's constantly on his ass, and he always just shrugs it off.
yeah,
Um, and it's because I think it's like she does like him. She is attracted to him. She can't stand that somebody just likes her for who she is, because that never happens.
yeah.
It always has to be sexualized,
And it's,
um,
it's always transactional, right?
and
It's not just
transaction.
sexualized, but transactional. Like,
Yes,
yeah,
yes, and she tries to sexualize it, and he tries to keep it like human, and that
yeah.
and that's even like, she can't bear that.
Yeah, I mean, like, the part that kind of unlocked the movie for me was, the two of them, near the very end of the movie, the two of them sitting on the couch watching TV talking, and he looks up what her name means, and
Mhm,
her name Anora means light,
mhm,
um, and it's a name that she hates and doesn't go by, right? And I think
yeah,
that's a perfect representation of who this girl is, right? Like, she doesn't see herself that way, and she intentionally backs off from this image of her as this bright shining light. No, I am not that. I think she hates herself on a lot of levels.
yeah.
And so she sees a lot of these things. This is, I think, the big question I have for you in this movie is, did she have any feelings for um Vanya at all? Or was she just completely enraptured by, like, the lifestyle and the things that it could afford her?
I think maybe a tiny bit.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it definitely hurts her that that he betrays her so easily and
Yeah.
thoughtlessly, and just in a way that reveals like he didn't really care about her in the slightest, and really was doing all of this as a petulant protest of some kind. Um, and you know like, he's consistently characterized and just shown, and like all the visual language of the film just is saying like, this is just a kid, like he's just
Oh
an
yeah.
idiot kid who
I actually kept waiting for the movie to be like, no, he's not actually 21. He's
uh
actually like 17. And he just told you he was 21.
yeah. I mean, he's a human too. That's one thing I really like about the movie is none of the characters, save for maybe like the comedy buffoon duo, are caricatures. Um,
Yeah.
and it's important that Vanya is a person. You understand why he's doing the things that he's doing. And in fact, I'd even go so far as to say that very often in movies, like that archetype of character where he's like, oh, he's the party kid. I'm like, I don't get that. I don't psychologically get that character type, and thus I'm cold to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if it was like the story or the performance or what, but he brought enough humanity and vulnerability to it that I was like, oh, okay, I see exactly why he's like this. I see exactly why he's doing this. It's understandable. There is a human being and a character under all of this posturing.
Yeah.
And he's also broken and pathetic, actually.
Yeah. Do you think he was in love with Anora at all?
A little bit. I mean, I think probably more than she was into him, but it clearly wasn't enough to change his behavior.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, he's a child and a coward.
Yeah.
And yeah, the idea of standing up to, like, he wants to stand up to his parents and he wants to claim his independence, but only in a very controlled manner. The second he gets pushed back, he completely crumples under it.
Mm-hmm.
It is pretty remarkable because I like the characterization of him a lot, because yes, he always comes off as a little childish, like especially the scenes, I don't know, where he's like sitting there on the couch playing video games and she's in his lap, is like he
Mm-hmm.
never seems more childish than that.
Yeah.
But like when you first meet him, he's kind of suave and cool and in control a little bit, right? Like you can see why she kind of likes him and she's a little enthralled by him, and like you can see why she makes the choice at one point to say, you have an hour left, we could go again, which is not something she needed to do at all, which I think was the movie trying to communicate to us that she's at least a little into him. Because that's having sex by choice. That's not that she did what she was obligated to do. She didn't need to do that, but she wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
sure.
But my point is that, like, I think he comes off as like a little, like, you kind of believe that person he is, and then everything goes down. People responsible for him start showing up, and it is kind of remarkable the way he just morphs into a child. Like, I couldn't, the way the character plays it, the way they shoot it, the scenes are blocked and everything. He's just a kid.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's all these subtle visual things they do that I don't even know if I could articulate what they are, but your sense of his apparent age actually decreases. And I think a lot of it is just his choices. Like I love one moment where she is trying to, like, he's drunk and passed out and she's trying to get his attention, and she like goes over to him and is saying his name, and he's totally unresponsive, and then she walks away, and then we see him like open his eyes for a second, and you realize like he's awake. He just doesn't want to talk to her. And he's just avoiding, he's just being avoidant, basically.
He doesn't want to deal with any of the consequences of his actions, actually, because he's a kid, and because he hasn't ever really had to. Like, he's got to live this completely carefree life. I love the reveal that he's in America to study. Like, he definitely hasn't done a second of that the entire time he was there.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the tonal comedy shift that you mentioned a minute ago.
Sure.
Because, like, that's in some ways the most fun part of the movie, although I don't know if it's the best part of the movie or my favorite part of the movie. And it's like, what's fun about it is the surprise of, like, you kind of think you're in maybe like one of these serious drama romance stories, and then the buffoon characters show up, and as soon as there's like a threat to Anora's meal ticket slash guy that she's into, she just turns into a completely different person. And that person being a violent, hyper aggressive, screaming monster, basically. And
when she's got the Brooklyn accent, and I think Mikey Madison like starts leaning into it a little bit more.
Yes, the Brooklyn accent, basically the stereotypical, crazy aggressive New Yorker. And that's just such a fun, like, this, you didn't see that coming at all. Like, when she's like destroys the entire house, fighting them off, and they're unsuccessfully trying to restrain her.
It's like, I hate just saying, wasn't this part funny? But like the fact that we go through three guys that
Uh-huh.
like one deals with her and then ends up tying her up, and the other's like, what are you doing? Why are you tying her up? And it was like, we're two guys, we can handle this. So he lets her go, and then immediately she
Uh-huh.
kicks the shit out of him. And then the third guy comes and he's like, why are you tying her up? Why are you holding her down? He's like, no, you don't understand.
Yeah.
I just like the progression of that was so great.
Yeah. And then so that's all funny. I mean, even the sequence when they're driving around town trying to find um Vanya is also funny because there's all these moments like where the guy with the broken nose just starts vomiting all over himself, and to me there's nothing funnier than somebody vomiting all over everything. I don't know why. But like it's funny, but there's also like a delicate palette of emotionality under this humor, where it's like because you're watching her, and there's so many, like, I think that's what makes this like an actual best picture contender is the layers, where it's like it's not just like, oh, it's hijinks, they're going around the town looking for him while being ridiculous and having altercations with random New Yorkers. It's like she's desperately hoping that his seeming abandonment of her is just some kind of lapse and he doesn't understand what he's done, and she's going to be able to find him,
while at the same time I think slowly realizing that it's not right and having to like fight back that realization.
Totally. And when she finds him at the strip club literally getting a lap dance, it's like crushing disappointment, but she's still trying to play it off at that point. Like the whole second half of the movie is the slow rolling car crash of her realization that this isn't going to work and never would have worked. Like, and she kind of knew this the whole time.
Yeah.
And maybe feels dumb for having even entertained it. Right. Like that's all the layers that are in there. Is maybe even from the beginning, she understood that marrying a Russian oligarch son on a lark was just not a thing that would work actually in real life. But like the appeal of the idea, the romance of it, the upside of it was so high that she just talked herself into it.
And I think the movie like needs you to buy into that, which is why I think it spends a good amount of time like making those sequences look fun. Like, I mean, I'm not a club party guy, but even I have to be honest that like looking at those scenes is like, there's a part of me that like wishes I was, and there's a part of me that looks at stuff like that and is like, like imagine if that's your life, man. Like that's all that you'd have, no worries. You just get to go out and party all the time and have fun and have random friends over and get wasted, and like that'd be pretty cool. I mean, I eventually would like go insane and it would not be cool, but like you can buy into it. And I think that's why like you need that, because you need her to both simultaneously realize this is absurd and will never work, but desperately want it to.
Yeah, absolutely. And then her eventually realizing like I don't even like this guy. This guy sucks. Actually, I don't even,
because he does. He's actually boring. And a child, and has nothing interesting to say about anything, and doesn't do anything, and like has no goals, has no likes, has no hobbies outside of getting wasted. Yeah, he sucks. He totally sucks.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you were saying about like being sort of braced for some horrible violent, like you're part of my mind the whole movie was expecting like the scene from The Departed to happen where suddenly something just horrifically violent just happens, partly because of the subtext of Russian oligarch, but also because I don't know what else to say other than just the whole cinematography vibe of the movie. It put this sort of tone of seriousness and dread over everything that maybe it was to some degree projection, but I mean even during the slapstick scenes I was like, this is like the color palette and what the camera is doing are not in line with slapstick comedy, but what the characters are doing is slapstick comedy. So it was kind of dissonant and confusing. I think this is like my biggest criticism of the movie, honestly, is during those parts when they're like clearly supposed to be funny, especially having finished the movie and seeing how everything fits together. You're like, yeah, that was just supposed to be straightforwardly funny. I was like not laughing at all because I was waiting for it to suddenly turn really grim, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, but like in my mind, that's part of the brilliance because I think that's all intentional, and that's
Uh-huh.
all the movie is fucking with you in that way.
Uh-huh.
That like you're like I do think it's I there was definitely a moment in this movie where like I'm laughing at this woman being tied up and having this strange man putting her in his lap and wrapping his arms around her,
Uh-huh.
right? And like it's really funny, and it is really funny, and like I don't think I think it's supposed to be funny, but I also think you're supposed to be like that's like she later calls him a rapist or like says he has rape eyes, and he's like totally put back, but like offended by that, but like you can kind of see where she's coming from a little bit there, and like that's the contradiction of the movie. And I totally agree, this movie is shot like a 1970s crime film, and
Mhm.
I'm not just making that up because I went and looked it up, and they're like Sean Baker said, yeah, I was channeling The French Connection and The Taking of Pelham 123, which are 1970s New York crime films.
Yeah.
It is trying to do that, and that is a contradiction as well. Like, why is it being shot like this? Why are we moving through the city like this? Why is it lit like this?
Yeah.
Like it feels like a contradiction, but I think that's all intentional, and I think that gets to maybe the underlying thing here, this contradiction of this idea of a sex worker, a prostitute that is like class wise the lowest rung on the totem pole, um like being lifted up into this world that is, you know, not hers and not real, right? um
Yeah.
so I think we're dealing with contrast and contradiction a lot. And by the way, one of my favorite things I realized while watching this movie is that these chucklefuck like goons that work for the Russian oligarch, they're just prostitutes of another stretch, right?
Mhm.
Like the moment it clicked with me was when the mother and father arrive, and both Toros and Nick, I think is the one that gets his nose broken, are like groveling at their feet
Uh-huh.
and like I'm so sorry, like just trying to like get back in their good graces. And I was like, oh, it's the same. It's their relationship to the Russian oligarchs is like her relationship to to um to Ivan, to like it's all the same, except instead of sex, it's like it's just a different type of prostitution essentially. And
Mhm.
I'm like, oh, I see what we're doing here a little bit now. It was
I like
great.
that. I don't think I made that connection explicitly, but I like that. I mean, I think Igor sort of does see it that way, where he definitely, you know, he doesn't judge her at all.
Yeah. I
Like,
think he's the only one that is aware of that, right? And
mhm.
he's the only one that doesn't like cow to the family either, right? He actually stands up to the family and says, you owe her an apology.
Yeah, he's just like a realist and a pragmatist, while also have like being the only one of them with a kind heart.
Yeah.
And so he just sees her as a human being, whereas they're constantly throwing insults and slurs at her. Um, I mean, the movie, pretty much everyone is always calling each other horrible things,
Yeah.
like literally just like the full bouquet of things that we can't actually repeat on this podcast. Like just just um I think you know, it's funny first of all, but also I think it ties in thematically with what you're saying, where it's like all of these characters are dehumanizing each other constantly. And Anora gets sucked into this too, where she's um you know, they make a thing of it that the two guys are I forget, you know, a specific ethnicity of you know, I don't even remember what it is exactly. You know what I mean? Where it's like, um,
Yeah.
they make it racial for no reason,
Yeah.
right? And it's all about like othering and denigrating each other. But Igor never does that, as far as I remember.
Mm-hmm.
So
No, he doesn't. Yeah, he's kind of on the outside of all of this, but I I love when the parents eventually show up and you kind of realize that the mom is just the one that's totally in charge, and the
Uh-huh.
dad's just like back there, just like, ah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then when my favorite moment is she gets her dig in, right? Like the mom, as she's walking away, the mom calls her a hooker or a whore or something. And she turns around with is like, yeah, well, your son hates you so much he married one. And then the dad just bursts out laughing and doesn't stop laughing. Like
Yeah.
that was great. That was so great. And it's just like it shows to like the mother is like really in on their good name and like how this ruins the family name. The dad is kind of just like an adult version of his son where he just really doesn't give a fuck about anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like it's all funny, it's all a game to him. He doesn't care because none of these people are people.
Yeah, she's clearly the mom is clearly the one driving we need to fix this, and he's just
Yeah.
like annoyed and along for the ride. Yeah.
Probably doesn't want to be in fucking America. It's like you gotta fly over to America just to fix this problem. I don't want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I just love the touch that the Godfather character Taurus, is it? Sorry,
Toros, yeah.
Taurus is at like a baptism, is like playing an important role in a baptism and has to leave the baptism for this.
Yeah. I
It's
think that's part of how they're just like a different form of prostitute, right? That's
Yeah.
just like this is they're
he's
slaves essentially.
he's sacrificing, like literally sacrificing the holy to
Mhm.
go take care of the profane, right?
Yep.
Like I mean, what's funny is I didn't think of that consciously while watching it, but it's like, yeah, that's not subtle.
It's not. No. Um it's great. Like I love it. I love the detail of this movie, by the way. Like does she have like glitter in her hair? I don't even know what it is, but she's like, and the whole time she has this stuff in her hair. It's not just like part of her uniform as a stripper and she takes it off when she leaps up class. It's just part of her. It's just part of who she is. I really, really liked it.
Yeah, I think it's glitter. I think it's like a glitter makeup that she wears around her eyes at different times too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which I guess goes with the light theme.
Mhm.
Yeah, I like
She
that the
doesn't love-
movie's called Anora, even though she goes by Annie, and I think that, like you mentioned a minute ago, the movie kind of brings it all together at the end where he Igor brings up her name and is like, what does it mean? And it's like, well, that's we're centering it on her actual name, the name that she has rejected, and that's
Yeah.
what the movie is called.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because
So
yeah,
because that is who she is and who she needs to learn to be. Hopefully, I don't know. Like, what in your estimation, like what happens after we leave the movie?
I don't know. I don't think it obviously points in a direction, is the truth. Like
Mhm.
I don't see an obvious like, and then she got her shit together and moved on. I don't see like a sign of that.
Sure.
But I don't. I mean, I guess by default, I would just assume her life goes on the way it has been. Like the way that last scene. I love that last shot. That last sequence. That is not a sequence that, Okay, so contrast that with sort of the trope of like we see her do some symbolic action that tells us like she's putting all of this behind her. She's gonna go become a fashion designer now. It's like, no, it kind of seems like all of the same issues are still present and
Yeah.
nothing has changed at all. So
Completely agree. 100%. Yeah. Like nothing. If anything, she's worse off. I mean, she's got some money and she's got a 4-carat diamond ring, which will probably sell for quite a bit. But like as a person, she's just not in a good place at all.
yeah.
Um, and like she kind of burned every bridge she had on the way out, right? Like, cause she just like, is that supposed to be her sister she's living with? I don't know. Her roommate, since we don't know if she's her sister or not, let's call her roommate. Like she clearly shitty and terrible to her.
Yeah.
She like, I like ditches her job. I think they probably will not be hiring her back after she brought a bunch of men to have a big fight there.
Uh-huh.
So like Yeah, I mean, I guess like the optimist is gonna say like, oh, maybe she can have a relationship with Igor. I'm like, I don't think so. I don't think
Yeah,
she loves herself, and so I don't think she's capable of being in like an actual relationship.
correct. Yes, that I think we're on the same page there. It's funny. Only now does it occur to me that like maybe that was a possible interpretation, that like maybe she would be in a relationship with Igor, but it was so obvious to me that this was not
Yeah,
a viable relationship that I was just like, no, no, she's gonna get out of the car and she's never gonna see him again.
yeah,
And at most, this is like a brief moment of humanity between two people that maybe will bring her some measure of healing, but I'm not.
I don't
Uh,
think so.
yeah, I'm not
I mean,
super.
maybe an optimist says yes, it could, but
I mean, the fact I just specifically mean the fact that she's like able to like cry in his arms is the most vulnerable she's been in the whole
sure,
movie,
yeah,
which is not good.
uh-uh.
But it's something. Yeah, you know,
Yeah,
it's a because she you know, she's had this like battle armor on the entire movie. She's had to be performing, either performing as a stripper, or performing as the girlfriend experience, or performing as like this warrior trying to fight for just to like claw some scrap of something to salvage from this whole debacle. And then that's the only moment in the movie where we see her just like kind of admit that she has nothing.
yeah.
um and so in that sense it's like, well, you know, that's her low point. Where she goes from there could go up, could go lower, I guess. I'm not
Mhm.
sure.
It's really interesting because Sean Baker, the writer director, has kind of made it his career about telling stories of people in sex work like this. Like his first film, Tangerine, was about a sex worker in LA, kind of almost like a day in the life of looking for her pimp slash boyfriend who she was pissed at. Her next film, The Florida Project, is really about a little girl living in like they have these like roadside motels that are like right out on the outskirts of Disney World,
Uh-huh.
and like people live in them, like kind of it's just this really specific like contrast of image that's like you're just outside quote unquote the happiest place on earth, but you are incredibly poor, barely scraping by, and it's about this little girl and her mother who is, I guess, not like I was about to say formerly like formally a prostitute, but that's a ridiculous phrase. She is sleeping with men for money.
Uh-huh.
um then his latest film before this, which is the only one I haven't seen, is a film called Red Rocket, which is about a retired male porn star kind of returning to his hometown, and the people of hometown rejecting him because he was a porn star. So like he very much likes to write and explore these sex workers and these and the lives they live. And you know, I think it's really interesting because you and I were talking earlier today about like on some level he is trying to destigmatize the idea and the concept of sex work as a profession, but I also think like a lot of his movies are about how horribly broken these people are. Like
Mhm.
I didn't leave this movie going like, yes, I think everyone should seek employment as a stripper and prostitute. It will fill their life with contentment and happiness. Not at all. We don't actually get to know a lot about Anora and her life, you know, before the events of this movie, right? Like, um, she seems happy, but also she seems like she's scraping by. Um, and it's I just think it's really interesting. Like he wants to tell real stories about real people, and these are people that don't get told stories about that treat them like human beings very often. And if they do, it's things like like Pretty Woman.
Yeah.
So he wants to tell these grounded, real stories about this real people, and I think he does a very great job of it. But like I don't know, what are your thoughts
Well,
on all that?
well, I think he did a great job telling a grounded story about a real person, but I don't see how this movie was even intended as a way of destigmatizing anything, because like you said, it makes it seem miserable and dehumanizing.
Hmm.
Now, yes, it makes it. I mean, it reminds you that these are humans, but also it shows that it is a dehumanizing, thing that they are being subjected to, or that they're having to subject themselves to, or however you want to put it. I mean, I think, maybe if I kind of stretch in the direction that I think he's intending, it's this idea of like, well, aren't we all though? Aren't we all dehumanizing ourselves by subjecting ourselves to someone else's authority for money? Aren't we all prostituting ourselves, doing some labor that we don't want to be doing in exchange for money so that we can survive? And thus, aren't we all sort of the same? And it's like, it's like, and like, I buy that as far as it goes, but it's like, yeah, but like that's not the thing. Like, you're now explicitly showing on the screen that these characters are miserable, and hopeless, and trapped and unhappy, and like all of the strippers are horribly catty to each other. They're obviously all miserable. They like, none of this seems good. So anyway, I don't know. I didn't feel like it was like that. I guess that's one thing I kind of appreciated about the movie, is it didn't particularly seem to have an axe to grind about like, here's how I want you to feel about this political thing. Like, I'm not saying it didn't have politics or that it didn't have a political message. I think that it simply told a human story, and then like a good movie can have politics that just kind of play out, and they just breathe, and they're alive inside that movie, inside that story. And that's what this did. Those are my feelings on that.
I mean, I think I agree with that. I think one of the things he kind of perhaps tries to explicitly explore here is this concept of, we all have this perception of sex work, and this idea of it as this kind of low class, like, the thing Anora takes umbrage with more than anything else in this movie is being called a hooker, being called a prostitute, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which, like, definitionally she is, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, but like, being labeled that way, and I think one of the interesting things that this explores in some ways through what you're talking about with like, on some level, aren't we all doing that, is like, this is a profession that exists because it is used it crazily, right? Like so many people pump money into this profession, because we're human beings and we really like sex, and then we at the same turn, like, dish out the money for it, and then say how disgusting and awful, and inhumane it is, like, while partaking in it. Like, I mean, it's just really interesting watching like the concept of OnlyFans, like, rocketing to the forefront of all this stuff. Like, you see these OnlyFans models and sex workers, like, talk about how much money they're making on a monthly basis, and it's just like, holy shit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in a world where porn is essentially infinite and free, right? Like, if anyone wanted to at any time, they could find porn. People on OnlyFans are making millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
I don't,
because we're so desperate for connection, and these people are offering this up. And so it is just, I just find it really interesting how we, like, not saying that it's like being a prostitute is like a good profession, that people should seek gainful employment in sex work. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't either, but just like, it's interesting how we perceive these things and how we perceive the people that do them, and how they're treated.
Yeah. I have no idea how to understand OnlyFans, by the way. I don't get it, but
I think like, okay, I don't want to say anything that pisses off any listeners, but it makes me sad. Actually, it makes me sad that it's as popular as it is, because to me, it's more than, to me, like subscribing to someone's OnlyFans is like orders of magnitude different from like going on YouTube and watching a porn, right? Like, it's personal, it's relational. You are paying money because you want to see not just naked people, but that particular person, and want to have an interaction with that particular person, it's I don't like it.
Yeah, right. Well, I think it's interesting to discuss it in context of this movie because
Sure.
it rubs us the wrong way, um, for the same reasons that
Pun intended.
I was debating whether to say no pun intended there, uh, in the same way that this movie kind of does, like where it's like, oh, that's not it's not quite accurate. Like the movie didn't rub me the wrong way because the movie didn't feel like it was trying to say like there's no negative dimension to this. In fact, I would go so far as to say that the movie that we just watched kind of agrees with what we just said. That, like there's something that's bad for the men and bad for the women in this dynamic, which it is showing to us on the screen. Like the women are getting money out of it and the men are getting sex out of it. So on that one single dimension, they're getting what they want. But like on every other conceivable dimension, they're basically doing this because they can't get what they actually want, which is human connection and love and belonging and all the things that she kind of thinks that maybe she has with her 21-year-old husband,
that she's known for a week.
Yeah, that she's known for a week. Like that's clearly what she like deludes herself into thinking that maybe that's what she has or what she could have with him. And that kind of tells you where she is in her life. So that I just don't know, man. Like I don't think this movie is a movie that's just trying to say like it's great. It's sex work is great. It's trying. I don't like the word destigmatize in this context. I just think that's the wrong word. I think it's trying to humanize sex workers, remind you that these are people who find themselves in a situation for reasons that, hey, if you were in that situation, you might end up making the same choices. So maybe don't be such an asshole about it. That's all totally fair. Totally on board with that. I mean, if like it's in the Bible actually that you know to be open-minded to sex workers, literally in the Bible. So, but that's not the same thing as destigmatizing sex work. I think it's a distinction worth making. Like I actually historically kind of when people say destigmatizing about sex work, I actually often think like I think you mean humanizing. I don't think you mean destigmatizing because you're not using the word correctly in this context. But they use that word all the time to the extent that I'm like, okay, I guess I'm not going to win the language police game.
Is it? And this might just be a contradiction of terms, but is it possible to destigmatize sex workers while not destigmatizing sex work?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I think that's another one of my problems with the word. Actually, is it's like what do you mean exactly? Because there's a lot of ways. I think there's a lot of quite plausible ways that one could interpret the concept of like destigmatizing a thing.
Yeah,
it's like do you mean that you mean that you want people to think that it's good, or do you mean you want people to stop blaming people for doing it? Because those are wildly different things, and then there's like a whole spectrum of positions between that. I think I do think that there is. I think you're right.
Yeah. I mean, I do agree with you though. I think I like humanize better. I mean, I think that is essentially what this movie is doing, right? You know, you have your stripper at a club that we get to see her after the day is done. She goes home to her shitty apartment. She listens to her roommate bitch at her about not getting milk while she's exhausted because she's been up all night because that's the job. And like the idea of this completely transactional relationship with this person that she doesn't even know being her ticket to, you know, a Cinderella-esque ascension in class, is like, these are people and they have wants and they have needs and they have goals and they have dreams, and a lot of what they do out of necessity because we need money to function and live in this society, and people feel like they have no other options and no other choices, and so they do this, and like I don't, it's very possible we have sex workers listening to this podcast right now, and I don't want them to leave with the idea that we're being dismissive and rude to them, because I don't think we are. But I do agree with you. Like, this movie shows, at least for this one person, or this group of people, that this is a horribly dehumanizing, cruel, soul destroying way of living your life.
I do feel like that's what the movie is saying, at the very least, like setting aside what, you and I's biases, like that.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be the case. It's interesting because I almost said a minute ago, like, the movie, one thing I appreciate about the movie is it doesn't moralize. Like, that's one thing it doesn't do. I mean, you could even argue that Pretty Woman sort of moralizes. Pretty Woman moralizes more than this movie moralizes.
Sure.
I think that's a safe statement. But like, but at the same time, part of me is like, well, kind of every movie moralizes, kind of every story moralizes. Like, you can't help it. There's a whole, I mean, there's a whole branch of the theory of criticism that kind of says, even if you didn't mean to moralize, you still moralized. It's implicit.
Sure.
It's part of the substance of creating a story is to inject that kind of stuff into it, because you're writing it from the perspective of who you are and the life you've lived, and etc. So it's not that the movie is quote unquote not moralizing. It's that it's just moralizing in a dimension that feels like the moral is, hey, you know what? Let's just give people their humanity and kind of acknowledge the absurdity of all of this, and the inherent contradictions in all of this.
Yeah.
And have a little bit of a sense of humor about some of these things, while also not undercutting the seriousness of the things that are seriousness. Like, I think I actually want to bring this back around to what we said about the tone being all over the place, because I think it connects to this idea where it's simultaneously like a farce and also a weighty, affecting human drama.
Yeah.
And that's actually kind of cool. Like, I can't really think of too many other movies that manage to do both of those things in quite the way that this one does. I can think of farces that have poignant moments. I can think of dramas that have funny moments. Certainly, can't think of a lot of movies that like towed the line this like you don't know, like, is this a comedy, is this a drama, how do you even pitch this, like, if you were going to describe it to someone? I don't know, and so it's unusual in that way.
Yeah, I agree with that. I love that. And this is like one of those things that, because this is Sean Baker's fourth or fifth picture, like, I bet the pitches had to be less explicit, because like, you kind of know who Sean Baker is as a filmmaker up until this point. Like, this is one of those things that, like, sometimes there are movies that come along that can only be made at a certain point in a director's career.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this is this movie with Sean Baker. Like, I don't know how you pitch this movie as like your first film, right? Like, I have no idea how you do it, how you get this movie made if this is your first movie ever, because like, explaining it just seems like it'd be impossible.
Yeah. I can just imagine. Yeah.
But I'm so glad it exists, and I'm so glad that it's up there and nominated for Best Picture, and maybe if the world makes sense, it could win Best Picture instead of Emilia Perez, which, it's so funny because we did not like Emilia Perez. I think it's safe to say that, but we still found something like interesting in it, and we spent a lot of time like talking about, this sucks and this sucks and this sucks, but there's just something about it. And it's so funny that this movie, Anora, is incredible and works on just about every level. And also, there's a lot of like really interesting stylistic and thematic things about it, right? Like, it's like, oh yeah, this is what a Best Picture nominee is, or should be.
Yeah. The definitely. I don't know if we're supposed to rank things as we go, but I feel like as an example of the art of film, and just in terms of like enjoyment, I think this is my favorite of the four that we've covered so far.
Yeah.
With Conclave being, I think, a relatively close second. It's just like, God, can you imagine two different movies?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's why these awards are ultimately silly, because those are two such different movies with such different goals to them, and it's like now we're putting them head to head in a competition. That's silly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I loved Conclave a whole bunch. I think this is a better movie.
Yeah.
And I like it better. Yeah.
I think it's interesting to me how much it comes down to the ending, because like if this movie had ended in a way that struck a false note to me, and if Conclave had ended in a way that I liked better, because I didn't like the ending of that movie despite liking the movie up to that point,
Mm-hmm.
the movies might very well have switched orders in my mind.
Yeah.
It really, it's just an interesting thought that to me, for me anyway, I think it came down to
Yeah.
sticking the landing versus not sticking the landing.
Well, we like to say it's about the journey, not the destination, but ultimately, when it comes to a story, the ending is the conceit. It is the declarative statement on what the thing is about.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, a movie like this, which I think just nails that so much that you're just like, oh my gosh, this kind of funny, silly romp just became incredibly moving and powerful to me. And Conclave, yeah, I really liked that movie, really did. I still kind of scratch my head at exactly what the ending is supposed to mean for us thematically. I think we got to something last week that I think felt right, um, but still,
Yeah.
yeah.
As simple as like that movie, the ending fails to connect in that way that you kind of want an ending to connect. And this one is just like ties everything together, and you're like, yeah, perfect.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, that is Anora. What a delightful movie. It's available to rent on video on demand right now. If you want to take a look at it, we strongly recommend you do. Great performances, great directing, writing, just a solid movie all around. Hopefully we will see it take some Oscars home, even if it doesn't take the big one.
Yep.
Doof.
All right, Matt, let's talk about Severance. Spoilers once again for everything through episode 2 of season 2 of Severance. Matt, what did you think? What did you think of this episode?
I continue to be loving it. It's kind of exactly what I thought would happen, where we basically we switch over to the outies, and the whole episode is about the outies.
Yeah.
And we figure out, the truth behind all the things that we were told in the first episode. If anything, I was surprised at how quickly we resolved things that I kind of wondered if they were going to be if they were going to be mysteries for a while.
Mm-hmm.
We just kind of resolved that. My favorite part was, of course, seeing Mark S's reaction to the possibility that his wife is still alive, and that like unfolding over the course of the episode, where it goes from him being like furious at his sister for even suggesting this as an interpretation of what he said. It's like, obviously I was talking about the baby. What are you saying? Are you saying, and he's just like, he's furious with her because he was just starting to come to grips with the death of his wife, really. Yeah. And starting to just barely begin to move on. And suddenly this is happening. And I loved everything about their dynamic, their interactions, just everything about that. That was the highlight of the episode for me. What did you think?
Yeah, I think I like this episode more than I liked the first one, and I really did like the first one. There's so much to love here. I think it's fitting in our Anora conversation how this is this deeply dramatic series that often fucks me up mentally and emotionally, but is also like very, very funny. The entire sequence with Dylan at the interview at the door factory is like some of the funniest shit ever. Just like the fact that they got an actor that looks exactly like him to be sitting across and just like the entire conversation, like, if you were a door, what kind of door would you be? Like that whole scene was just all time, and is like one of the reasons I absolutely love this show. I think it is really interesting though. Like, this is something I wanted to talk to you about, because like I think there's a version of the show where like they do this really clear demarcation where like the silly kind of broader and absurd takes place in the world of the severed, right? Like in the world of the innies, like just the absurdity of Milchek and like the egg parties and all these things, like this kind of like larger than life absurdity is the world of the innies. And then outside of that, things are kind of mundane and normal. And like I think we saw a lot of that last season where like with the difference between Mark S and Mark and their lives they live is like one is like dark and depressing and gray and the other is absurdism. One thing that I think is interesting as the show has carried on is that like that tone and that flavor um is extending outside of the severed floor. And I think the door scene is a great part of that. Like that seems like something that doesn't feel real to me. It's absurd.
Yeah.
And also like Milchek, like they could have done a thing where Milchek on the inside is this kind of absurdist boss caricature, but when you see Milchek outside the severed floor, he's just like a dude. But they didn't do that. Like Milchek on the outside is still like the same kind of absurdist character.
Yeah.
And so I'm not this isn't a critique. I think it's just interesting that they didn't there's not a demarcation point for like the tone and how this is a drama, but like an absurdist drama in some ways.
Yeah, the whole world feels weird. I love
Yeah.
the door scene, like you said. I love, the building, the door factory. It's just this ugly brick building with a sign that says "Great Doors," and it's like the sign is like too small and ugly, and it just comes across as farcical. I think last time, maybe our last conversation. I think what I said was I expect that we're going to kind of move away from the office satire side of things.
Yeah.
But it's all, and I'm not saying I don't know what I'm saying exactly, because I think I'm just less certain of that. I think it's like, because the scene that you just described is kind of an office satire scene, except it's an interview instead of a typical office satire scene. It's a satire of an interview. It's or a parody or whatever. But also it's not just for laughs though. Like there's substance to it. There's the fact that we see that people are prejudiced against people who've been severed.
I have a question for you about that.
Uh-huh.
Do you believe there would be that hardcore of a prejudice against severed people?
So I mean, this is probably a super unsatisfying answer, but I feel like we don't know anything about this world. Like like Severance seems to be, in the context of this world, like a huge deal. The daughter of Petey last season.
Yeah.
Like her punk band literally sang songs about Lumen and Severance. Like it seems like it's one of the top social issues of the time.
Yeah.
So if you're asking, like that's just kind of the conceit. So I don't know that I have an answer. I will say this is not the question you asked, but I will say, like, if you're trying to hire someone and they say, "Yeah, I worked for 5 years," and you say, "Great, like, what did you do?" And they're like, "Oh, I don't know. I don't have any memories of that." And then you're like, "So you didn't really work for 5 years?"
True. Yeah.
So you actually have no experience at all.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a mark against you in the old, HR manual or whatever.
Yeah, no, fair. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that the world is so interestingly constructed in how little we know about anything. Like there was a line in last week's episode we didn't talk about, but it was something to the effect of like Lumen operates in 300 and something countries. Well, Matt, our world does not have that many countries in it. So like with Lumen, you never know what to believe. Is that supposed to be like, because that's something that is said to the severed employees, right? So it's part of that video. So it's like, is that the truth? And this is just a world that has many more countries than our world has, or are they just lying to severed people to construct a version of the world that exists? I mean, there's already like an interesting style, right? I think we talked about this last season where like everything's kind of archaic. Like the cars that people drive seem like 90s cars. The technology that they use, like when Helena records her apology video for her drunken outburst, it's on like very analog recording equipment, right? So it's just like everything's kind of off a little bit, and we just don't have a clear picture of any of it. So yeah, I mean, I wasn't a complaint that the one guy was like anti-Severance. I was just curious what you thought about that.
Yeah, I think it qualifies as like a weird topia, which I'm trying to normalize that term, because it's like it's definitely not just Earth with Severance, right?
Yeah.
It's we've got this whole lumen thing, which is it's almost like, what if Scientology was one of the most powerful social and political forces in the world? Is maybe the conceit, but at the same time, you don't really know that, because again, we know so little. We just see so little of the world. Anyway, yeah, that's we spent a lot of time this week, this episode with Helena. Like, this is really the only time we've gotten to know this character effectively.
Yeah.
And that was good. You talk about this now, because I know you have something to say.
Yeah, so I was pretty adamant last week that I thought the version of Helly R that we see under in the episode was not actually Helly, was Helena, and I was shocked to learn that my self-created theory was also like the most popular theory in the world, and everyone was talking about it, and I was like, oh, I guess I'm not clever. We didn't get confirmation or denial of that in this episode, but I'm kind of more convinced than ever that it just is, because I think we meet Helena as this woman. You know, our first experience of her in this episode is her father walking up to her and calling her a fetid moppet, right? Which I think that's just how I'm going to insult people from now on.
Perfect.
And then we see her like very intently like watching Helly and Mark's interactions on the severed floor, right? Specifically the kiss moment, right? And it's just starting to build this version of this character who I think kind of just desperately wants connection, love maybe, and is kind of watching this other version of herself experience all these things, and is very curious about it. So, you know, my hypothesis last week was that they want insider information from the innies on what they saw while they were out there, and so they sent Helena down as kind of a double agent to gather that information. That became very clear very quickly was just not accurate, right? First of all, they don't seem to care what anyone but Mark saw. They don't seem to care about anyone but Mark generally, which is an interesting wrinkle.
Yeah.
And so there's no reason to send Helena down there to do that. So my new theory now is that they send Helly back down there to acquiesce to the demands of Mark, because they need Mark for reasons. And Helena, of her own accord, has made the decision that she is going to go herself and not. And I don't know how like this works technologically. I mean, she is the daughter of the owner of the company, so I'm sure she can like press a button or not press a button secretly that allows her to not switch over to her severed version. But that's what I think is happening. She's there, and like a lot of the interactions in that regard make sense. Like we kind of talked about the awkwardness when Mark reached out and hugged her, and my interpretation at the time was because she doesn't really know him and was uncomfortable with that. And now my interpretation is this is just a woman that has never been hugged before by anyone. And so she doesn't know what to do with physical contact like that.
Yeah.
I am really into her as a character, though. Like, theory aside, I am really into Helena. And it seems like, I mean, maybe she's going to end up being like our primary antagonist of the series, or maybe even just this season. But really, really into her. And I think the actress is doing a wonderful job with her.
Yeah, I continue to love how all of the actors do their innie versus outie versions of their characters, where it's not like over the top, but you can always tell.
Did you read that Adam Scott wears like it's not a corset, but he wears like a back brace for any version of himself just to make his posture better? He wants like the innie version of himself to stand up more straight and have better posture, and the outie version to be a little bit more slumped.
I mean, I didn't read that he uses a corset, but I always noticed that he's totally crooked in his outie version. Like his head is literally tilted slightly to the side. I mean, and you can see that when he does the switch over, like it's just like he's standing up straight and symmetric, and his head just droops to one side because he's just, his whole musculature has just softened, because he's beaten down, right? beaten down by life, whereas Innie Mark is optimistic and always raring to go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty sold on your theory. I think you're just right. There are so many things that in the first episode that Helly said that it's like plausible that Helly could have said those things, but also it makes too much sense that those would be things that Helena would say, right?
Yeah.
The little detail that I liked this week that, you know, if this theory turns out to be true, I will point to is in the sequence when you see all of the characters go back to the office. She goes down the elevator. She goes into the elevator. The elevator goes down, and they do the sound of the elevator going down. You hear like ooh, and you're expecting to hear the ding as that just being like the closing note of the like of that story movement, and you don't hear it. They don't give you that, and I was like, that's interesting.
Yep.
And to me, I was like, yeah, that's because she didn't switch over. So
yeah. I know there's people in our Discord, and I've seen people elsewhere talk about how like this theory is so obvious that it's a red herring. And like sometimes I think that's true, but I think sometimes the writers of the show are playing games with you less than you think, and they're just writing what makes most sense for the story. And just because like we can figure it out doesn't mean it immediately becomes wrong. But I don't know. We'll see. We'll see.
I hope that Severance as a show does not get bogged down in what has happened historically to other mystery box shows where the storytellers forgot about telling a story and instead just like try to outthink an audience of several million people, which they're never going to do successfully anyway, and just tie themselves into knots and started doing things that are effectively random so that people couldn't guess them. It's like, no. Should all be motivated by character decisions. And that just makes too much sense. And it would be great. Like, and if you learned that we were right, you wouldn't be like, oh, that sucks. I saw it coming. It's like, no, that's a great character choice. That's a great story moment. Like I hope that happens actually.
Yeah, I agree.
Anyway.
All right, so we got some more interesting stuff with some of our other characters. We already talked about Dylan and his interview.
Yep.
I just can't get over they make their doors in house. It's fucking hubris.
The funny thing about that is like that's such a plausible, like, while being funny and over the top, that's such a plausible thing for like I've met so many people in so many fields who earnestly deep in their heart think that everyone else is just mistaken and that they should have done what, you know, you should have gotten into installing carpet or whatever, because that's what I do. And you're a fool. You've actually made a mistake in your life to not have done have recognized the truth of this. Yeah. It's very funny. I love it.
Yeah. Apparently the creator of the show came up with the concept while working for a door manufacturing company. So I think this was, you know, him channeling a little bit of his experience with his company.
Awesome.
Great. Yeah. So we also have Bert showing up for the first time this season, Matt. He's spying on Irving. Why is he doing that?
I don't know. And Irving himself is also, you know, acting very cagey.
Yeah, so we see Irving go to a telephone booth and make a call, and what he says to the person on the other line is, "My innie has got the message," right? Which is interesting. I think one thing that I was thinking about a lot is there was this idea with with Irving that the experience of Innie Bert was leaking into Outie Bert, right? And so Outie Bert was incessantly drawing this dark hallway with the red elevator at the end because the experience of his Innie version was like bleeding through, right? And I think, wouldn't it be interesting if you flip that? The idea that Outie Irving is incessantly painting this hallway again and again and again and again to try to push his subconscious to infiltrate into the Innie version of himself to go examine and explore whatever the fuck this elevator is.
Oh
Because I
gosh.
do think there's a lot of stuff going on in this show about like the bleed through, right? And like, because I think ultimately, I think that's what Selvig was doing with Mark, right? Was kind of trying to test how much of a bleed through between Miss Casey and Gemma and Mark, the two versions of Mark, like can we force something to leak over from one side to the other. So
Yeah.
I really like this idea that it's the exact opposite of what we thought with Irving last season.
I think
And that might mean like that's what he means by has gotten the message, right? Like I've been able to communicate this idea to him somehow.
Yeah. That makes a ton of sense. I mean, like part of me feels like it's like a sort of Munchkin theory where it's like, yes, that makes analytical sense to me, but I don't know if this show operates on that level.
Fair. Yeah.
But that's not me saying I disagree or that I think it's wrong. It's because it does make a ton of sense. Like clearly they, you know, when the innies wake up, they can remember like that cars exist, even though they've never seen a car. You know, they know how to operate an elevator, even though they've never seen an elevator.
Yeah.
And so knowledge leaks through, and then maybe like Audi Irving knows something, and he knows that you can sort of exploit some aspect of this to push messages through into the subconscious of your any. I this reminds me, I guess I hadn't thought about this in a while, but like Irving, my impression of Irving is that very often Irving is sleep deprived at work and then like just like nods off at work, and that's when he sees the like liquid coming down from the ceiling.
Yeah.
And my thought was like, well, maybe Audi Irving is intentionally not sleeping so that any Irving will pass out and then dream, and then the dreams are where the leaking happens.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a merging of the two ideas that we're talking about.
I like that.
Yeah.
I think it's, I mean, one of the central questions of the show, I think, is like kind of this broad question of what defines who you are, right? Like, because that's a really interesting question of like, are Mark S and Mark Scout the same person?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, probably not now, but like, were they the same person at the beginning of this whole thing? And like, one of the things that I read about, actually, someone had this idea that knowing what we know about Helena now and seeing Helly and how Helly, when she first got there, and her reaction to Severance and her reaction to being told and her pushback, it just makes a lot of sense for a very privileged rich person who's used to getting her way or getting what she wants, that the innie version of herself is defiant in very specific ways and pushes back on rules and structure. So that might lend to a similarity between your severed self and your regular self. But we just don't know. I think that is going to be kind of one of the central questions of the show, is like, what defines who you are?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess I would say at this point, it seems to me that like the moment the innie wakes up, it's basically like, well, you're the Audi, but you have amnesia suddenly. But then past that point, your experiences diverge.
Yeah.
And then you eventually become effectively a different person because you have a totally different stream of life experiences.
Sure, but I wonder how, like, I don't know, this gets into really philosophical stuff. Like, even if you can't consciously remember experiences, can they alter who you are?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what defines who you are, right? Like,
Yeah.
these are age-old questions that I do think
Sure.
the show is going to eventually explore.
Yeah, no, it's fun.
Do we think Dylan's wife is like someone important?
Because we haven't seen her face.
Because we haven't seen her. Yeah.
I'm not sure who she could be.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of characters in this show. I mean, I guess she could be some random person at like, I don't know. I try to avoid the theory crafting online because I just want to watch the show.
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah.
But I get the sense that there are some, and when I say I get the sense, I guess I should be more explicit. Like, I've accidentally seen like, you know, Reddit threads or whatever, or discussion happening in various places. And it's like some people's theories get pretty out there in terms of like, basically everything we're seeing in the whole show is some kind of conspiracy.
Yeah.
And, is not absolutely nothing is what it appears to be. And yeah, so I'll acknowledge that it is kind of interesting that we never see what she looks like and makes you think,
Yeah.
So,
I mean, like we learned that like she wanted his innie to know her name, and it's just I don't know, it's just interesting stuff. I guess the only other thing I wanted to talk to you about this time is we seem to be moving towards this central idea that Mark is special and important, right? And that's like what he's working on is like the thing that Lumen wants done, is like priority one for Lumen is whatever Mark is working on. We got a little bit of hint at the end of last week's episode that it was perhaps something to do with like reconstituting Gemma, or like maybe Gemma's mind or something like that. Like they need him to complete the project is what they say. How do you feel about this? Because honestly, like my gut reaction was a little bit of disappointment that like the idea that Mark S is special or important in some way. I don't know why, but I was a little bit like, oh, I don't like that as much.
I think for me, I wouldn't go so far as to say disappointment, but as I said before, I'm not in the show for the mystery. So I was just like, oh, okay, it has something to do with the macro data they're refining is, something to do with his wife who he thinks is dead, and how all that works mechanistically. I'm like, I can't even imagine an explanation to that would make me be like, oh my God, that's so cool and interesting. Because it's like, no, what's cool and interesting about the show is the characters and their interactions. It's not nothing to do with like what is the macro data and how does refining work. I don't really care. So it was not disappointment so much. It's just like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. Like I am, of course, as we talked about last week, I am, of course, interested in the mystery box on some level, but mostly just want to see what Mark Scout does.
Yeah, I mean, part of it makes me slightly worried because I'm like, is this in the Matrix? Like, is this all in the Matrix? Like, is this all gonna is the mystery box reveal gonna be? They're all in the Matrix.
Even the Audi version of them is just another severed floor.
Exactly. And I wouldn't be like crushed and hate the show, but I would just be like, oh, like again, I don't care. I think I care less as the show goes on, actually, because I'm like, oh, what's Helena gonna do? That's what I'm invested in.
Yeah, I am so invested in that character and what she's gonna do and what she wants. Right? What does she want? And how is she going to go about getting it?
Yeah.
And love it.
Yep.
We didn't talk much about Devin, Mark's sister, but I love her so much. And she's the one, like that entire conversation she has with him about Gemma and how she feels about it, I think is really, really great. I love that so much.
Yeah. And I mean, Mark is being a huge asshole, but also you understand where he's coming from and that totally, he's feeling a lot of really strong emotions. I think that's like some of the most powerful stuff in the shows is centered around their relationship, where they clearly have a lot of closeness.
Yeah.
But there's like this huge darkness surrounding the fact that he had this terrible loss, and she's been doing whatever she can to help with that. But he's clearly not been cooperative. Like Audi Mark is just kind of an asshole, actually.
Yeah.
And so there's just a lot of tension there, and it's delightful.
Yeah, agree. All right. Well, my wife is out of town this weekend, so I'm not going to be able to watch the third episode until Sunday night, and it's killing me. It's killing me.
Yeah, I don't know when I'm going to watch it because we have nonstop podcasts.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Got book club tomorrow night. Yeah, book club's tomorrow night from a Buick 8. If you're listening to this
Or
on the 31st,
It's tonight.
it's tonight. We're gonna be talking about Stephen King's From a Buick 8. I think it's gonna be a great conversation. You should check that out.
Yep.
And then I gotta watch From, and then I gotta watch Ouija,
Yep.
Ouija board,
Yep.
spooky board. It's been a busy time, but we're loving it.
We are.
So let's wrap this episode up so we can get some sleep.
All right.
And then go do other stuff. So that is it for us this week, folks. If you have any opinions about Anora or about Severance Season 2, Episode 2, please let us know. You can reach out to us via email at doofmedia@gmail.com, over on Instagram at doofmedia, X at doofmedia. I think that's all the places. I think Reddit. You can go to the subreddit r/doofmedia and find a thread for this episode and chat with us there.
Yes, the subreddit is a great place.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not already subscribed to the Doofcast, we encourage you to subscribe and ensure you never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. I do have to emphasize that the YouTube channel is popping off these days with our live video versions of our Flanagan's Wake podcast. It's just it's really fun to watch things start to move on the YouTube channel.
Yeah. For the first time in 10 years, we have posted videos to our video channel.
Yeah.
And turns out YouTube likes that when you do that.
Isn't that interesting?
If you like what we do here and want to support us, please consider becoming a patron of Doof Media. We are completely 100% patron funded. As you can see, we run no ads or do anything else. So it's just about our patrons. And if you want to be one, you can head on over to patreon.com/doofmedia. We will be releasing our episode on the TV show From. We're going to be doing episodes 5 and 6 of season 1 this month. That'll be coming out, I think, in just about a week. So if you want to catch up on that, the only place to find that is on our Patreon.
That's right. Also, please consider giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Each review helps us get more exposure and introduces new people to the content that we make here.
All right, folks, next week our Oscars series continues with one of the most surprising entries on the Best Picture list this year. The body horror film The Substance is up next.
I'm thrilled.
I'm so excited about this. Check out the movie and then join us next week to chat about it. We'll see you then.
My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say. My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say.